Today I'm going to be discussing all the books I read in the month of March. March was a huge reading month for me compared to the rest of my reading in 2024 so far, but it was also kind of the worst in terms of average rating. I did not have a lot of great books this month, but I did read a lot. Got through a lot of books on my TBR, got through some arcs I wanted to read, and I did end up with a couple 5 stars by the end. So as always, we're gonna go in order from my least favorite to my most favorite, so stick around to the end to see the best books that I read this month. Starting with the books that I DNF'd this month, these are the books that I chose to not finish because I did not like them, and there were 3 of those. The first one is How to Kill a Guy in 10 Ways. This one was featured in a reading vlog I did where I was reading new mystery thriller books, so you can check that out if you want to hear my full experience with that and some other books that'll be in this video. This one just didn't capture my attention. It's about a woman who kills guys. She does it because her sister was attacked by a man and now she's out for vengeance. It just seemed a little too obvious for me. I felt like the synopsis kind of laid out everything that was going to happen, so I didn't get very intrigued in the beginning and I ended up setting it down after a couple chapters. I also DNF'd a book called Cold to the Touch. This is an Alaskan detective thriller where there's a murder and a detective is trying to solve what is going on. I liked the concept for this, especially because it did feel very similar to the latest season of True Detective. If you happen to watch that, this feels very similar to that, but I didn't like the writing style of this one. It felt kind of rough drafty. Like it just felt like we were kind of going through the motions. It was a lot of telling versus showing, and it felt kind of like stereotypical detective type of story, so I just didn't get that intrigued by it. And then the third book I DNF'd this month was a weird one and it was That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon. I ended up DNFing this one 43% of the way through, so I did get through quite a bit of this one, and honestly I could have finished it. Like I wasn't hating it, but I just wasn't liking it enough to really keep going and spend time with it. This is a fantasy book that is like cozy and romance and silly comedy all together. It's about this woman named Cinnamon who ends up saving this demon named Fallon, and then they end up going on this quest together, and she's very much like, I don't really want to go on a quest with you, but he loops her into it, so she's gonna have to go, and the story develops into being a romance between them. I just didn't feel the chemistry between these two characters. He comes on very strong very fast and is just like, we're gonna be together, like we're doing a quest, that's just what's gonna happen. And it just didn't really pull me in enough. It's a very silly book, like it's not meant to be taken super seriously, but even given that, I just couldn't get absorbed in this one and I decided to sit it down. Now getting into the books that I did complete, starting with my 1-star reads. I had 2 1 stars this month. 2 books that just really let me down. The first one is The Teacher by Frida McFadden. I did do an entire dedicated reading vlog to my experience reading this book, so I will not belabor this one here because I talked about it at length in that video. If you want spoilers, you can check that video out and get the full spoilers. If you don't want spoilers, they are clearly labeled in that video too, so you can skip over those. But this is a story about this woman who is a teacher and her husband's a teacher, and there's this student at the school named Addie, and the previous school year there was a little bit of a scandal and something happened, and another male teacher basically got forced into leaving the school, and so there's all this energy around Addie about wondering what happened there. And now this year you're following a woman named Eve who is being Addie's teacher, and she's getting to know Addie and drama ensues from there. The TLDR is it was horribly written, horribly boring, and horribly ridiculous at the end. This is my 4th or 5th book from Frida McFadden now, and I'm kind of over it. The other book I gave a 1 star is a little bit surprising because I've been seeing really good reviews for this. I thought I was gonna love it, and that is Nightwatching. I listened to this one on audiobook, and this just sounded like something I could love. It's a home invasion story. It's kind of like a thriller slash horror book. And when the story begins, this woman wakes up in the middle of the night and there's a man in her house, and she has to get her children and protect them. They're like hiding in the house away from the intruder. And I think that's kind of all the synopsis sets up for you. The synopsis also tells you she recognizes him, like she knows who he is. Dun dun dun, what's gonna happen? I was so disappointed by this book. I was so bored. I was so bored. I thought I was going to be on the edge of my seat. I thought I was going to be scared to be in my house alone listening to this audiobook, but it did nothing for me. I was really upset. But people who have really similar reading taste to me have loved this book. Like my friend Sab from Riveting Reads, we ended up actually reading it right at the same time, accidentally, and she loved it. She gave it a 4.5 star, I think, and then I gave it a 1 star. And we were chatting back and forth about our experiences, and it's like we both can like agree on what happened in the book, but you either love it or it doesn't work for you and you hate it. For me, I just didn't find it to be very tense. It felt really boring to me. There are a lot of flashbacks that occur in the first part of the story while her home is being invaded, so the actual home invasion stuff didn't read very intense for me. You get pulled out of that a lot into these flashbacks, learning the history, getting some context into what's going on in the family and who these people are. And then the second half of the book also just dragged on for me. I don't want to spoil like the direction it goes, but man, for something I thought would be fast-paced and thrilling and scary, it was none of that for me, and I ended up giving it a 1 star. Next is a book that I gave a 1.5 star. I considered just giving it a 1 star, but it got that little 0.5. I don't know if it deserved that, but I gave it a little 0.5, and that is Fourth Wing. Yes, that is right. I decided to revisit Fourth Wing this month, and I actually got through it, the whole book this time. I first picked this up in either January or February, and I DNFed it pretty early because I was like, wow, this is not good. And then I ended up reading a spoiler summary for everything that was going to happen in Fourth Wing afterwards, so I could just know what was going to happen. And even having read that, it already like erased my mind to some extent, where I wasn't remembering everything that was going to happen. And for some reason, I felt compelled to give it another chance this month. And then I got about 25% in, and at that point, I was like, well, I guess I'll just keep going. I can just put the audiobook on. I'm gonna get through this whole book. I know people love Fourth Wing. It was clearly so popular for a reason. People in my real life talk to me about Fourth Wing. Like, it is a book that people are loving, even if they are not heavy readers. That's so great for you. I'm so happy for you. It was so horrible to me. I did not think the writing style was good. I think Violet is so annoying. I think it reads so YA for it to try to be an adult book. It's so weird because it reads so YA, and then the characters are like thinking about sex. Like Violet at one point is thinking about how she misses sex, and it's very abrasive to read that because the rest of the book and the context of it, she feels YA, like she doesn't feel like an adult, and then that feels strange. The characters were so boring to me. I don't know how you're supposed to feel anything about Xaden. I feel nothing about him. They are so boring and plain and don't feel real. That doesn't feel like there's real development behind them. The only thing that gives it that little 0.5 is, one, I got through it. So like it did something to keep me like minorly intrigued to some extent, to make me curious enough to get through the whole book. And also I do like the dragons. That's the only thing that really stands out in this book to me, is I like the dragons. But otherwise, I just was so utterly bored. Like it felt like I would have gotten the same experience. And I guess I kind of did because I know what this was like, but it felt like I would have gotten the same experience from reading a chapter summary of what happened as I did reading the book. Like the book doesn't feel full and rich to me. It just feels like I'm being told these things are happening. It doesn't feel like I'm immersed in this world and that I'm caring about these characters and that they feel real to me. It just felt so flat for me. But again, I know it's very, very popular and I know a lot of people love it, and I'm so happy for you. It is just not for me. So I did go ahead and read the spoilers, chapter summary stuff for Iron Flame just to see like what happens in that book. And oh my God, the ending of that one, like what is happening? I don't know. But apparently this is gonna be like a 5-book series. So I'm probably just gonna keep doing that. If these books stay popular, just read the spoilers for what happens, just because I get FOMO. And like if a book is blowing up, I kind of want to know generally what's happening, but I cannot put myself through the experience of reading these books anymore. I know now they're not for me, but my curiosity is going to take over. So I'll be able to like be in the conversations a little bit, knowing what's happening. But yeah, I'm not passionate about this series at all. Moving on to my 2-star reads of the month. The first one is My Husband by Maud Ventura. And I read this for my friend Elizabeth's book club. And we read this for the February book club, but the book club live show was like March 5th or something. So I actually read this and finished it in March. But we do have a full live discussion on Elizabeth's channel. I'll have that link down below if you want to check that out to hear different thoughts about this book. But for me, It was a 2. It was a little bit of a letdown. And I think part of that is because my expectations for this were really high. I was hearing a lot of good buzz about this on TikTok especially, and it just sounded like something I'd really enjoy. It sounded mildly weird. It's about this woman who is obsessed with her husband. The synopsis doesn't tell you too much, and really there's not a ton of plot to this. The synopsis basically just tells you this woman's obsessed with her husband. She meticulously plans all of these things for him. Like, she's always thinking about her husband, and then she starts putting him to little tests, and then one day she realizes that she's gone too far. So you follow the book through the course of a week, and the book begins and the husband comes to her and is like, we need to talk. And she's like, oh my God, my husband's gonna leave me. And then you go back in time and you follow the 6 or 7 days leading up to that event, and you're just really inside this woman's head. It is a very stream of consciousness style book, and I actually didn't hate the writing style of that, but it just didn't feel like it went anywhere for me. I just wanted more out of this. I was very intrigued at the beginning, but then once I realized like nothing was gonna happen, it was just kind of like leading to nothing almost, it lost me. Even though it's a short book, it felt like it dragged on a little bit because of that. So it didn't really work for me, but I have heard really good reviews of this, and you can go check out that live show to see what other people thought of it, and maybe you will decide it's for you, but for me, it was just a little bit of a letdown. Speaking of letdowns, Drowning by TJ Newman was also a 2-star for me, which was so disappointing because I loved the previous book I read from this author, Falling, which the cover looks almost exactly like this. I don't know why they did that. Falling, I gave a 4.5 star. I absolutely loved it. It was so tense and gripping and psychological and intriguing, and I had so much fun with that book. So I was excited to check out another book from TJ Newman. Falling is about this pilot who is piloting this airplane, and they get a note that their family's being held hostage, and in order to save their family they have to crash the plane, so they're put to this like impossible choice. Drowning is about this plane that crashes in the water, is stuck underwater, and it's about the rescue mission trying to save these people who are stuck in this plane underwater before they lose oxygen. I think I just learned something about myself in this experience, and that is that pure action like this doesn't work for me as much in book form as it does when there is that psychological aspect. What I love so much about Falling was like, oh my God, what are they gonna do? What are they gonna choose? They're put to this hard choice. Who's responsible for this? Like, there was a little bit of a mystery to uncover through that as well, and that kept me really hooked. This book is just like, oh, how are they gonna figure out how to save these people? It's just a rescue mission, and that was not as intriguing to me. I didn't get as invested in these characters. There wasn't much of a mystery to solve. Like, I was pretty sure they were gonna be rescued by the end. And the human aspect that's like driving this story, because there is a little bit of like character depth and story going on in the background, is that one of the characters that's on the plane is this man with his daughter, and one of the people that is on the rescue mission is a woman who is the mother of that child and his wife, and they're currently separated or like getting divorced, and so there's this tension between them, and then they're, you know, kind of like being brought back together in a way through this circumstance, and you're kind of rooting for them throughout the story. But I don't know, it just didn't work for me as well. I wasn't intrigued. I was kind of just waiting for it to end, and it was a little disappointing. But I would still pick up more from TJ Newman depending on what direction she decides to go with her next story. If there's a psychological aspect, I'll be more drawn to it. If it seems like it's something more like this, it's probably just not going to be for me. While We Were Burning was my other 2-star read of the month. This one was featured in a reading vlog, so you can go see my full thoughts and experience for that. I'll have that linked down below. This book had a lot of potential early on for me. I was very intrigued at the beginning of the book, but the direction that it took just ultimately did not work for me. So I think if it sounds interesting to you, I'd still say it's worth picking up. I just had this dream and this vision for what I wanted it to be, and it just wasn't that. You're following 2 characters in this story. I think their names are Elizabeth and Brianna. And Elizabeth is this well-to-do white woman in this fancy neighborhood. Brianna is this black woman that Elizabeth hires to be her assistant. Elizabeth's friend dies, and that sends her into this like tailspin. She's having a lot of anxiety and she needs help, so that's why she hires Brianna. And then you find out very early on in the book that Brianna actually has a connection to Elizabeth and her neighborhood, because Brianna had a black son who was killed by police in Elizabeth's neighborhood. So Brianna has this sort of motive to be getting close to Elizabeth to try to understand more about what happened to her son. But Elizabeth doesn't know that, but you as the reader know that. And that creates such interesting tension that really got me pulled into the story. I was very excited to see what direction it was going to go. But after the first like 30%, it just started falling flat for me. And by the end, I was like, oh, that's it. That's what we're deciding to do with the story. And I was pretty let down by it. All that to be said, this was my first encounter with this author. I would definitely read more from them in the future, especially if the synopsis sounded intriguing, but this one just felt a little bit flat for me. I wanted something a little bit darker. Now we're getting into the portion of the video where a lot of these books were just fine for me. I had a lot of like 3 and 3.5 star reads this month where I liked them. I didn't love them. I didn't hate them. They were just fine. So this is going to be a little bit of a stretch through some of those books. First up is The Verifiers by Jane Peck. I ended up picking this book up last year as I was just trying to use up some of my book of the month credits before I decided to take a pause on my membership. I haven't really ever heard anyone talk about this, I don't believe, but it was a mystery book and I hadn't read it yet, so I decided to pick it up. And then this month I decided to check it out. This book kind of had a lot going on. It's like mystery with a literary fiction feel with also a little bit of a dystopian sci-fi tech feel to it as well. I think that's why it ended up being a 3-star for me, because all of those things coming together didn't fully like click together for me and make an impact. It kind of just felt like there were a lot of different things going on, and if it would have maybe either came together more impactfully or just focused on one of those things, maybe I would have had a better experience with it. But again, I give it a 3-star. I mean, I thought it was fine. In the story, you're following a woman named Claudia who is living in New York. She is Chinese and her family is putting this pressure on her to just find a nice Chinese boy, but she's a lesbian and they don't know that. And she's also taking up this job that they don't know about either because she's afraid to tell them. Like, they want her to have this impressive career, and she's doing this thing instead where she is working at a dating detective agency. Basically, it's this place called Veracity, and if you are dating someone on a dating app, you're meeting someone online and you kind of want to get like a background check on them and see what's going on in their life, you can hire Veracity to investigate that person and then give you a report and let you know like, oh, actually the person you're talking to is married, or actually the person you're talking to doesn't exist. Like, they'll investigate what's going on for you. Pretty soon after she starts this new job, a client goes missing and Claudia decides that she wants to investigate what's going on. And the book takes this really interesting direction. My favorite part about it was the sort of like dystopian tech dating app investigation part of it and what ends up being revealed and the direction that the mystery goes. Sometimes that's what loses me in a mystery. I'll talk about that in the next book that I talk about, where the direction the mystery went just wasn't as interesting for me. This one, I really thought the direction it went was pretty cool, especially because it felt so prescient for the moment, where I'm seeing all this discussion about dating apps and some lawsuits and all these things going on. So I just thought that was a really unique, fun angle to take and a fun mystery to explore. But altogether, cohesively as a story, there was just like a little too much other stuff going on that didn't make a huge impact for me. I did like it. I do think it is the start of a series. I think that there will be more to come out. I think I'm good just stopping here. I'm not really interested in picking up another book in the series, but if it sounds interesting to you, I thought it was a good time. Now, for Mother-Daughter Murder Night by Nina Simon. This is a book that I love the characters, I love the setup, but what let me down was the direction that the mystery took. This was also a 3-star read. I thought it was good, I thought it was fine, but it just wasn't great for me because of the meat of the mystery. So the setup of the story is you're following a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter. Lana is this really successful real estate mogul who doesn't have much of a relationship with the rest of her family, but when she gets diagnosed with cancer, she needs someone to help take care of her, so she decides to move in with her daughter Beth and her daughter Jack. Beth is a nurse. You don't really know too much about her. And then Jack is the 15-year-old daughter who works at this like kayak tour guide situation. It's set in California. They're living in somewhere near like San Francisco-y area. And one day while Jack is out on her little boat tour situation, she ends up finding a dead body. And unfortunately, she becomes one of the suspects in the investigation because of being the one that found the body. And Lana is like, well, I've got nothing better to do and I'm not gonna let them accuse my granddaughter. So let's all get to investigating together and figure out what went on. All of that I loved. I loved these characters. I loved their dynamics. I loved the setting and the description and the writing style and the little comedic, cozy element to it as well. But once they got investigating and once it started exploring the nature of the mystery, it just got a little bit boring to me. This is a similar problem I had when I first picked up the Thursday Murder Club book, and that's why I ended up DNFing that one. I'm gonna go back to it. I'm gonna try it again. I'm gonna try to push through, but it really can lose me in a mystery when the meat of the mystery is just not as interesting for me. I checked the synopsis to see if this would be a spoiler. This isn't the synopsis. It kind of gives you a hint as to the direction the mystery goes. It says, with Jack and Beth's help, Lana uncovers a web of lies, family vendettas, and land disputes lurking beneath the surface of a community populated by folksy conservationists and wealthy ranchers. The whole land dispute situation was a little bit of a snooze fest for me. So I really liked the family, I really liked the dynamics, I really liked the writing, but just the direction was a little bit boring. So I think this is this author's debut. I will definitely pick up more from them in the future if the synopsis sounds interesting to me, because I think there was potential here. It was just more of like a personal preference thing. Oh, I also saw, I'm assuming the video will be out by now, but Gabby from Gabby Reads ended up reading this book with her mother this month as well, which was such a cute video. They did a little combined reading vlog, reading the book and talking about their experience with it, and it was very, very cute. So if you want to hear more opinions on this, I'll have that link down below too, so you can check that out. Listen for the Lie was another 3-star book that I read this month. This one was featured in a reading vlog, so I'll have that link down below if you want to check that out. I was not initially super interested in this book, and I talked about that in the reading vlog too. It didn't sound like something I would particularly enjoy, so I wasn't going into it with high expectations anyways, but the publisher sent me an arc of it, and I figured it was going to be pretty popular because it was a GMA pick and a Book of the Month Club pick, so I decided to just give it a shot anyways. What this story is about is this woman who, her whole life, she has kind of questioned what happened. She's from a small town and her really good friend died, and everyone thinks that she murdered her best friend, but she doesn't know. She doesn't know if she did or not. So she moved away from that town to kind of get on with her life, but now she's being pulled back into the town because her grandma calls her and is like, it's my 80th birthday, come celebrate my birthday with me. But also there's this podcaster who is starting to run a series of his podcast talking about the investigation, figuring out who really did kill that woman. And so that kind of draws her back into the town too, and then she ends up getting stuck in that whole situation and is like talking to the podcaster and trying to figure out for herself what really happened. Did she really kill her best friend, or did somebody else do it? This has sort of like a cozy mystery feel to it that I was not anticipating. I didn't think that this would be a cozier book, but it does have that sort of cozy feel because it is in a small town and your main character is kind of quirky. Like, she is constantly imagining killing people in weird ways. Whatever she sees them holding, she's like, oh, what would that be like if I just like grab that and then like beat them over the head with it? So that tone caught me off guard a little bit in the beginning. It took me a minute to get like into this book. I think it was fine for what it was. I just don't really love the memory loss trope in a thriller, and I also don't really love podcasts in a thriller, so it just wasn't the best recipe for me. I was intrigued enough in the story to keep reading. The podcast segments were actually some of my favorite, which was a big surprise to me, but I felt like the podcast segments were what was actually driving the mystery forward and giving you clues and giving you things to think about, whereas the present day segments, you're kind of just watching the main character bumble around her small town. So it ended up being fine for me. I'm sure it's going to be one that has mass appeal because it is getting into like Book of the Month and GMA, and it's just kind of like a standard mystery thriller, but it wasn't anything special for me. You Know What You Did was another 3-star thriller that I had this month. Again, featured in a reading vlog. I'll have that link down below. I had an interesting experience with this book because the first part of my experience with it was just trying to figure out what the book was. Even when I read the synopsis, I was like, where is this gonna go? What is this story going to be about? In this story, you are following a first-generation Vietnamese American named Annie, who is an artist. When the book begins, her mother dies, and that starts to cause her a lot of grief, and it also causes her issues with OCD to start manifesting again. She has always had OCD, but she was able to get a better grasp of her symptoms for a while. But now that her mother has died, that is bringing all these things up to the surface again. And then one of the clients that she's working with on an art project disappears, and she ends up being at the focus of the investigation for that, and that's just making everything worse. But there's also like 2 or 3 other things going on in the story as well that I don't want to fully give away. The synopsis mentions one other thing, but I feel like that was just more confusing to read in the synopsis than it was to just get in the story and figure out what was going on anyways. So there's kind of like a lot going on in this one in the beginning, and it feels like it's going to be this really complex thing, and it also feels a little disorienting. You're like, what's going on? What am I reading? What is the main story? What can I grasp onto? Like, it takes a minute to get pulled into, and then by the time I got to the second half, I was more comfortable. I realized what was going on and the direction the story was going, and it kind of just became a little bit more of a standard thriller from that point. All in all, I thought this was fine. I did give it a 3-star. I think it was a little bit messy and could have been better organized a little bit, but I also wonder if part of that was intentional because the main character is so disoriented, if it was supposed to be reflecting that experience. If that's the case, it was effective. I was disoriented. But what I also appreciated about this book was seeing representation of OCD in a thriller, which I think is the first time I've ever seen that done. It does say that this is the author's debut thriller. I don't know if she's written other things, but for a first thriller, it was an okay time. And also the OCD representation comes from the author's own lived experience, and she says she actually has a lot of symptoms similar to what this character experiences in the book, which I also thought was nice to see that kind of representation be authentic. All that to be said, I would pick up something from this author again in the future. This one was just okay for me, but I will be keeping them on my radar. Moving in to the 3.5 star territory, we have The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. This was a book club pick for a book club I'm a part of, so picked it up in February. Actually, it was the February book club because we were doing like a romance for Valentine's Day, but we didn't do the discussion until early March, so I didn't read it till March, similar to my husband. And this one I thought was okay. It was not super memorable for me. I'm already kind of like losing it in my mind a little bit. This was also my first experience with Catherine Center. I've heard really good things about her stuff, and I thought it was okay. She didn't immediately strike me as an author that I'm like dying to read another book from, but I would definitely pick something up again from her in the future if it sounded interesting. The story's about this female bodyguard who gets hired to work for this male actor who's very handsome. He's kind of like the it guy in Hollywood right now. And she gets hired to be his bodyguard, and then of course they fall in love. It didn't feel like the perfect pairing to me. Like I don't really see this couple standing the test of time, but for the cute little romance it was, like I had fun with it. There was also a lot of real life human flaws and baggage that each character was carrying, and then they had to like work through that as they came together, which I do like seeing in romances. I like when it's not all super easy. The writing was good, like it was intriguing enough. It just wasn't a favorite kind of romance for me. And like I said, I would try something from her again in the future, but this one was just, it was okay. Murder Road by Simone St. James. This one was featured in a reading vlog that I did, and I had a good time with it. It was not my favorite Simone St. James I have read. In fact, it's probably my least favorite, but I still thought it was good. It's just that I thought the other ones that I've read are better. The other books I've read from her are The Book of Cold Cases, which is my favorite, and The Sundown Motel. In Murder Road, you're following this couple who is going off for their honeymoon, and while they're driving down this highway, they end up picking up this woman who's in distress, and they take her to the hospital, and she ends up dying. And then it turns out that a lot of people have died on this stretch of road, particularly people who get in the car and hitchhike end up being murdered. And so the police are investigating this, and then they turn to this couple as kind of prime suspects as well because they were found with a woman who died. The couple ends up staying around in the little town area, and they decide to do some investigating for themselves to figure out what is going on in this string of murders. This was a really good, easy listen. I did listen to this one on audiobook, and it just had this like nice cozy feel to it. It's like a small town investigation, amateur detectives. They're also on their honeymoon, and they're like, yeah, why have a good extravagant honeymoon when we could like investigate this small town murder mystery? Which was really cute and just a good little introduction into the story. But ultimately it just didn't like impress me a ton. I didn't find the characters super memorable. I did really like the direction that the mystery went in this one and the way the supernatural was incorporated, because Simone St. James is usually incorporating some kind of supernatural stuff in her stories, and the way she does it just always works so well for me. I'm not the biggest fan of supernatural, but when Simone St. James does it, I am there. If you've been following along with me this year, you know I'm trying to read one book a month from the Throne of Glass series, and this month was Throne of Glass. I started with The Assassin's Blade last month, and this month I read Throne of Glass, and this I ended up giving a 3.5 star. I just have to say, thank God I read The Assassin's Blade first, because I know that's contentious. Some people say read it first, some people say read it third or fourth in the series. I cannot imagine what kind of experience I would have had with this book had I not read The Assassin's Blade first, because in The Assassin's Blade, which also, let me just tell you how I'm going to be talking about this series as I go throughout the year. They're not going to be in reading vlogs, probably any of them, and I'm not doing like a separate dedicated video for them because I know people on this channel are probably not here to see my thoughts on Throne of Glass. So as I'm talking about these in my wrap-ups throughout the rest of the year, I'm just going to talk about them spoilery because you've probably already read them. And if you're not interested, you're probably skipping over this section anyway. So I'm just gonna talk about these spoilery throughout the course of the year as I'm chatting about them in my wrap up so that I can have some kind of documentation of how I felt about them. I'll put the spoiler banner on the screen, but just so you know like what to expect as my wrap ups continue, we're just gonna be talking about them up to the point that I am in the series. So for this one, I've also got to say, I'll probably be saying character names not in the best way because I don't really watch people talk about these books. I don't want to get any spoilers. I'm so stressed about spoilers. I'm avoiding them at all costs. And I don't listen to the audiobooks. So I'm probably gonna be saying character names a little bit weird. But Selena, she was so boring in this book. She was so boring. And it sounds like this is the first book Sarah J Maas ever wrote, that she was writing when she was 16 and spent 10 years to get it published. So as a first book ever, like it's fine. And it's a YA book and it came out a million years ago. But after reading The Assassin's Blade, I was like, where is that badass assassin that I just got to know and love? Plus you have all of these characters like fawning over her between Dorian and Kale. They're both like feeling her, and that's classic YA love triangle, give two very different love interests and get people interested kind of thing. But I would have been like, what do you even see in her other than her being pretty? Because she's just boring. Like she's just not doing a lot, and she's just like, oh, let me be in pretty dresses and whatever. She was so cool in The Assassin's Blade, and the struggle she went through, it kind of reminds me, I always just think about like the Red Desert novella in that one and how she has to go training in the desert. It just reminds me in a way of Kill Bill. I freaking love Kill Bill. It's one of my favorite movie series of all time. And the training segments of that just remind me of Uma Thurman's character and like all she had to go through and all the things that just made me really love Selena and the struggle she went through. And then this book, she's just kind of chilling, just going through the games. It felt longer than it needed to be. The middle felt really repetitive of just going through different games. People keep getting murdered. I was surprised to learn this was a murder mystery. I did not know that. I did not expect that to come in. So I thought that was cool. And overall, I like the idea for the book. It just felt a little longer than it needed to be. Selena was a little more boring than I wanted her to be, especially after having seen The Assassin's Blade. But what I did like about it, since I'm kind of complaining, you're like, where's the 3.5 star coming from and all these complaints? Like it pulls me in so much. I just like Sarah J Maas's writing. It just really transports me to this like other world. It's so easy breezy to read. I also like that I have no idea where this is going to go. Like I said, I've had no spoilers. For the love of God, don't spoil me in the comments. I'll be so mad at you. But I have no idea who the primary love interest is going to be in this series. I read Akotar, the series, so I know what she likes to do, where she like introduces these people to you, but like you're not gonna meet the love interest for a while. So reading between her and Dorian and Kale and their dynamics, I'm like, are either of these gonna be interesting? I don't feel like either of them are endgame. Where are they gonna go? Is someone gonna turn evil? Is someone gonna die? Like, is someone gonna betray her? What's gonna happen? I'm just being set up for this journey and I have no idea where it's gonna go. I also just always end up surprised by her stories. Like I just have no concept of what to expect. And the way this one takes the element of going into these like word marks and the magic symbols, and she's like going down these secret tunnels and discovering these things, and this ghost of the Queen of Adarlan is coming to her. I'm just like, what is happening? Where's the story gonna go? Some of the mystery elements did seem kind of obvious, like obviously Cain was a bad guy, and obviously Princess Nehemia was there for some ulterior motives. Like I was just waiting for that to be revealed. But I mean, it's a YA book from a long time ago. It's the first of a series. Like I'm not expecting it to be overly sophisticated and surprising in those ways, but it did keep me intrigued enough to keep me going in the series. So I'll be reading the next one, whatever that's called, have no idea, next month, and we'll continue in this journey. Bride by Ali Hazelwood was a 4-star for me. I did a dedicated reading vlog to this book, so you can check that out to see my full thoughts and experience with this one. Looking back on my month of reading, I read this earlier in the month, and then I had a pretty rough month of reading where I just wasn't feeling a lot for books. Now that I'm at the end of the month looking back on this, I'm like, this book made me feel alive. It made me feel something. Like I could retroactively give it a 5-star just for giving me that feeling in comparison to a lot of the other books I read this month, because I had fun with it. It was silly, it was fun, it was intriguing. It was just a little bit of a different venture outside of my reading than I typically do, because this is a vampire, werewolf, enemies to lovers, forced proximity situation. And there were some really silly things in this, especially in the beginning of it, that I go into in that reading vlog that I did. But overall, I had a fun time with it. Like I could see myself rereading this book, which is kind of crazy. So maybe I should bump it up and give it a higher rating. Maybe I'll have to rewatch my video to remember my experience, but just know in my mind, like this one stands out. This was fun. If it somehow surprisingly made its way to like my favorites of the year, that wouldn't be the craziest thing. This is only the second thing I've read from Ali Hazelwood. I definitely need to read more. I've read The Love Hypothesis and this one. So let me know down in the comments below where I should go next with Ali Hazelwood because it was fun and I'm looking for more fun. The Sleepwalkers by Scarlett Thomas was a 4-star that was featured in a reading vlog I did, so you can see full thoughts, full experience with that one if you would like. This is a story about this couple who's going on their honeymoon in Greece, and they're staying at this resort where the previous year there was this whole thing that happened where this couple, the husband was a sleepwalker and he was like walking out into the ocean and his wife followed him and tragically they both died. So there's this weird kind of lingering feeling, but also kind of mystery of what really happened at the resort, and now this new couple's there for their honeymoon and then things start getting weird for them. This one was kind of experimental in the way that it was written and pieced together, and I really thought that was cool. I really liked that. This is again another book that I could like boost up in rating now, seeing everything else I read this month. Like I wouldn't feel crazy giving this a 5-star. I really like these types of thrillers that one, do something a little bit different, and then two, kind of make you question like what really happened. It gives you a little bit of ambiguity and makes you do a little more work to figure it out versus just spoon feeding you everything. And then that kind of tied in with the themes the story is diving into about perception and reality, and I just thought it was a cool time. How to Solve Your Own Murder was a 4.5-star book that I had this month. Again, it was featured in a reading vlog, so you can check that out if you would like. This is a sort of cozy village murder mystery styled book. There's a lot of characters, a lot of suspects, and it starts when this character is coming in because her great aunt Frances is calling her over into the village. She is set to inherit Great Aunt Frances's estate, but when she gets there, Great Aunt Frances is dead, so the inheritance situation is going to be happening a lot sooner than they expected. And then the story is following an investigation of who murdered Great Aunt Frances. But there's also this really fun element to it where Great Aunt Frances, when she was young, was told by a fortune teller that she would be murdered, and she told her this in some ridiculous kind of weird cryptic riddle. And so for her entire life, Frances was trying to anticipate who would murder her and solve this riddle. So she has all her own research she did, and then she does actually end up getting murdered, and now her great niece is coming in trying to solve all of that. So the story is pieced together through flashbacks from Frances's perspective as she's been trying to solve this and what happened when she was younger. And then you're also following the present day as her great niece is getting to know the people in the town and trying to figure out who would have murdered her great aunt. The only reason this was not a 5-star for me is because it didn't feel like something that would be particularly memorable for me. Like the characters didn't feel particularly memorable and nothing felt particularly unique. I just thought this was a really well executed murder mystery that I had a lot of fun with, and I would highly recommend picking up. I feel like I need a breather. These wrap-ups are getting so long when I read so many books in a month. By the time I get to the end, I'm like, I have to talk about the books I loved the most, but I have the least amount of energy at this point. So let's reset. Let's recuperate. I have 2 more books to tell you about. They're both 5 stars and I love them with my whole heart. Remember earlier when I was talking about the Verifiers and I said that was a mystery that was trying to do all these different things and it just didn't come together and make a good impact for me? Well, this book was doing a lot of different things and it came through masterfully for me, and that is Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. There is so much going on in this book. There's so many things to discuss. This would be an excellent pick for a book club because there's so much you could dive into. It also reminds me of I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay in the style where that book had a lot of different themes, but it didn't come together super well for me. I am always looking for a book that can be complex and cover a lot of different themes and just come together like the perfect puzzle pieces mashing together, and this book did that. It was so good. And it was so wild to me because I was not expecting that. This is another book that I picked up just because I had some book of the month credits to use. I didn't know if I'd ever read it. I didn't know if it sounded particularly interesting to me. It sounded like it was going to be more literary and maybe boring, and it just wasn't screaming at me on my shelves to pick up. But I decided to finally try it this month. I was like, I'll just start it and see how I feel. And of course, my camera battery is dying. One moment. Okay, so I started this one on audiobook and I loved the audiobook experience of this. I primarily read it through audio. I'd really recommend the audiobook. It just really brought it to life for me. I loved the writing style. I loved the voice. I loved everything about this book. It was so good. Also, like right before I read this book, I watched Anatomy of a Fall, and this reminds me a lot of Anatomy of a Fall as well. So if you liked that movie, I'd highly recommend picking this up. But it was just like back-to-back bangers to watch that movie and love that movie movie and then to read this book and love this book, it was a great time. So let me tell you what the book's actually about, because I'm just kind of rambling at this point. You are following this story through Mia's perspective. Mia is a 20-year-old woman and her father goes missing, and when he goes missing, that just sends his family in crisis, trying to find him, but then also starting to learn more about him as they're trying to find clues to be able to find him. When the father goes missing, it is because he was out with his son, who I don't remember how old he is. Teenager, somewhere around there, somewhere between 14, 16-ish. He was with his son, Eugene, and Eugene has autism, specifically Angelman's syndrome, and he is nonverbal. So Eugene comes back and they don't realize he's in distress, but it becomes clear that he was in distress because his father has gone missing and Eugene isn't able to communicate with them what happened. I love this book so much. I think it's so fascinating what it goes into and the things they start to discover about their father, and particularly this research he was doing on what he calls the happiness quotient. It was just so perfectly pieced together as Mia's learning more about her father and what he was doing and his motives, and coming to understand how he has connected to his family and what he was thinking about in relation to his family. I mean, it's so good. It's so good. I feel like I can't say a lot about it because it would get into spoilery territory to really examine too far into it. But wow, I just thought the characters felt so real to me. I felt like I was right there with this family through this entire crisis. There were many times I was tearing up while reading this book. It was just really, really good. As for genre, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, like literary, mystery, thriller, where is it going to be? And I think I saw somewhere someone phrase it this way, as a philosophical mystery, and I think that wraps it up really well. It's a philosophical mystery, really makes you think about things differently, and God, it was just so good. And lastly, my last 5-star read was Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane. This is the second book I've read from Alison Cochrane. I've also read Kiss Her Once for Me, and I think I gave that book a 4-star, and after reading this one, I am obsessed. I am obsessed. I will read anything Alison Cochrane writes. I was going into this expecting a little more rom-com than it is. It's a sad freaking book. This book had me sobbing. My eyes were swollen from this book. I was using tissues. I was unwell. The setup of this story is you're following these two women, Logan and Rosemary, and they used to be best friends when they were teenagers, but then something happened that made them drift apart and they kind of became enemies, and now they're back working in the same small town. They're both teachers at this school, but they kind of stay in their own lanes, keep their distance from each other until they get pulled together by their former English teacher, who they're both still friendly with and they still connect with him, and he lets them know he only has a couple months left to live and all he wants to do is go on this road trip and go to Bar Harbor, Maine from wherever they are in the Pacific Northwest, to take a cross-country road trip, and he wants them to come along. Logan self-describes as a fuckboy lesbian and just can't seem to really get her shit together. She's still living with her dad. She won't leave her small town. She's kind of a little bit of a mess. And then Rosemary is like prim and proper, has it together, always in the best outfits and 3-inch heels. She will create a itinerary binder for everything she does in her life. She has her shit together. Logan also has no idea that Rosemary is also a lesbian, and neither of them really have any idea what happened to their friendship. So when they're forced back together in this forced proximity with their English teacher, who they love, who is dying, who they have to take care for, and his dog, who he got while he was going through cancer treatment as well, and they're stuffed in this van and they're going across the country together, I was like, great, this is gonna be opposites attract, forced proximity, cute, enemies to lovers situation. No, it was heartbreaking. I got so close to these characters. They felt so real to me. I felt like I was in this van with them going through this journey. I felt like I was losing my favorite English teacher along the way. It was so emotionally impactful for me, and it was so queer. This is like the most queer book I've read in a long time, where just like every reference and everything was just like delightfully queer. When Logan curses, she curses like in the name of lesbian icons. Like she's like, Kristen fucking Stewart, I've just got a da 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 da. Also, what is more queer than, first of all, girl, a teenage female friendship where you're like, I just don't understand what happened. But it's like, clearly we're in love with each other. And then also the adoration and extreme over-the-top closeness with your English teacher. Also, their English teacher is a gay man, so he is also queer. And oh my God, it was so great. I loved seeing them go across the country. There's a lot of time they stop in these like small towns and they just expect to be met with homophobia, but instead they're met with queer people all over the place. It's like they'll stay in this little random little hotel and they think that this guy wearing this like fly fishing t-shirt is gonna like hate crime them, but really he's like, oh, I have a trans daughter and like I think that's great, and and it was just so delightful in that way. And there was this found family vibe happening between these three characters as they were going across this trip, and it was so sweet and sentimental and heartbreaking and heartwarming in different ways. I will say I didn't really feel the romance there as much. Like I didn't really feel a ton of chemistry between these characters. It felt like they were just in such different worlds. I can't personally see them working out for the long term, but for the glimpse of what it was for the story, it was a cute time. And I ended up not even really being there for the romance by the end. I was like, I don't even care if these characters get together. Like I just witnessed such a beautiful story that really makes you think about the preciousness of life, and I just absolutely loved it. So that is it for all the books I read in the month of March. It was a really big reading month. There were a lot of books that were just fine, but I'm glad I got to end it on some books I really feel passionate about that I think were so good and that I highly recommend picking up. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you think about them, or let me know if I convinced you to pick any of them up. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!